I'm hydrated. Go ahead.
Why are some scientists saying there's an urgent methane problem in the Arctic, and other scientists are saying, nah, no problem, not the whole.
The question is, why are some scientists saying that methane coming out of the Arctic Ocean is a serious problem, and others are saying that it's a problem for the grandchildren to solve, if I might paraphrase, that it's no problem, at least not for a long time. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, one of the most conservative scientific bodies on the planet, in their 5th assessment, officially released last year, mentioned methane twice. In thousands of pages, mentioned methane twice in a single table, and concluded it's a problem for the grandchildren to deal with. And that's really the story of my life as an environmentalist, an environmental scientist, an environmental activist, is that all environmental problems are problems for the grandchildren to deal with. And they have been since I was just a wee grandchild. And now I'm old enough to be a grandparent. And yet it's always a problem for the grandchildren. I would argue it's not a problem, it's a predicament. Problems are found in math books, and the solutions are at the end. Predicaments have no solution. As Tim Garrett's work points out, atmospheric scientist at the University of Utah, now more than 7 years old, only collapse of civilization prevents runaway climate change. And it appears by the time that paper came out, runaway climate change was already triggered. Only collapse of industrial civilization prevents runaway climate change. Who's going to vote for that? Who's going to vote for the rapid release of ionizing radiation so that we bathe in that for the rest of our lives? So it's a predicament. And why do some scientists think it's urgent and others exclaim that it's not? And here the others include the likes of Gavin Schmidt, who replaced James Hansen as the highest ranked climate scientist in the US federal government, and David Archer at the University of Chicago. Both modelers who can't understand why the data don't fit their models, and disparage field researchers who collect the data because the data don't fit their models. So that seems a little problematic to me, that we don't believe observations, but instead we think models have all the answers. In addition, it's easy for me to understand why Gavin Schmidt doesn't tell us how urgent the situation is. He's an employee of the federal government. How can you tell if a politician is lying? Yeah, his lips are moving. And Gavin Schmidt is in a political position now. If only a few million people understood how dire the situation is, they might live in the manner I've suggested. And then the whole house of cards come down like the house of cards it is. As far as other scientists not explaining that the situation is worse than you've been led to believe, I can't really speak for them. I defer to Upton Sinclair in his quote from about 100 years ago, "It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it." So maybe that's part of it. Maybe it really is a patriarchal world, and the patriarchs don't want that to go away. So all the climate scientists in positions of relative authority are relatively old, relatively wealthy white men who are doing just fine with the system the way it is. So I can think of several reasons, but none of them are based in the data. None of them are rooted in observations of events that are underway. I don't know if you saw the quote from Adyashanti that I had on the screen when people were walking in. Enlightenment is an incredibly destructive process. It's painful and destructive. It destroys the facade. It requires us to throw away everything we've believed to be true. Not many people want to do that. At some point, we stop telling children that Santa Claus is, a real thing. At some point, we do the same thing with the Easter Bunny. At some point in some cultures, we do the same thing about invisible spirits in the sky. At what point do we tell the truth? How old do you have to be to be presented the evidence about abrupt climate change. Apparently, we're all children in this society, so the corporate media and the corporate governments can't trust us with the information that's actually out there. So it doesn't get put out there. I think it's a tragedy, which is a goat song. You know, the English word tragedy is derived from two Latin words, one of which means goat and the other means song. So when we had goats on the homestead every day, I'd walk past the goats several times a day, and every time they go, meh, meh. And every time I'd say, yeah, I know, it's a tragedy. But I digress.
Our story is that we left the Bay Area of California 8 years ago. Our place in Palo Alto was at 7 feet above sea level, and the street had already flooded. And we moved to Bellingham, Washington. Another bay, but this time our house is 100 feet above sea level. That's when we thought where sea level was the key issue. And then in 2011, we sat in front of the TV and watched Fukushima explode. We don't know now whether our salmon is radioactive. Haven't gone so far as to buy a Geiger counter yet, but pretty soon. And in any case, the salmon have been diverted by this business of the jet stream, which I don't really understand, up to the Fraser River. So I guess that I'm still taking in the fact that you can do everything right in terms of figuring this stuff out and trying to take action. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's over anyway. And I'm just still accepting that, although I've been reading your books right from the beginning. I'm a slow learner.
That's an excellent point. That's hope and fear again, representing the twin sides of the I don't know the future coin. And I was influenced by both when I made the worst decision of my life so far. I feared collapse of industrial civilization and what that meant for me and my wife and the people around me. So I left active service at the university to create a homestead. I hoped for a better future. I hoped that we could stop emitting carbon dioxide so quickly. I hoped that we couldn't trigger runaway greenhouse, not knowing that by the time I left, it was probably already underway, because we only know about these self-reinforcing feedback loops in the rearview mirror. So Fukushima is almost certainly an extinction level event on its own, and that's one of several hundred that are out there lurking. Climate change is almost certainly an extinction level event on its own. So what to do, how to act? I mean, if you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, then do. I would suggest doing something beyond the mainstream. And there's no escape, right? You move out of the San Francisco Bay Area to Bellingham, but there's no escape. There's no escape from Fukushima. There's no escape from ionizing radiation. There's no escape from runaway greenhouse, no matter where you go. As nearly as I can tell, I've influenced 5 people in my life. I'm going to try to remember them. My wife. I've influenced these people in various ways, not always for the better. There's a couple of very good high school teachers who left their jobs and follow my lead, and now they don't work in the conventional sense. They left at the age of 44. That was 4 years ago. A woman who's become a dear friend and colleague, when she heard me speak a little over 2 years ago, went home and lay in bed and cried for 5 weeks. And when she got up, she said, "I've always wanted to make a movie, so I'm going to make a movie." Her first degree was in radio and television production. And then, she got married and had kids and lost track of the things she loved to do. So she made a movie. She went back and did what she loved. And then there's a guy that most of you have probably heard of who was reading my work for a few years. And then he wrote to me in December 2012 and said, as a result of your projections and prognostications, I'm going to move to the global south, as far south as I can get without being on Antarctica. And Steve Wozniak moved to Tasmania, the southern island state of Australia, about 6 months ago. So those are the 5 people I think I've had some significant influence over. And I'm really only irritated about one of those, and that's that my buddy Woz didn't invite me along for the ride. You know, we don't have influence over a lot of people. We have influence over the people we spend significant amount of time with. So let's live with that. Let's let that settle in and treat the people we come across with dignity and respect and compassion. And I think no matter how this turns out, even if all this stuff is wrong, that living in the now and experiencing life is never a bad alternative. Yes?
You seem to be in a good place in your evolution of your ideas and everything. I'm also on a similar journey. What was the most painful truth that you, in this whole process, that you've come across, and ever let that one between position, stay inside this fact?
So it was, he begins by complimenting me in my emotional state, I guess, and says he's on a similar path. And what was the most painful event, the most painful awareness? Misunderstanding. Yeah, okay, that's great. You know, I realize now that I could never be a great teacher again. I was a great teacher. Even when I was banned from teaching in my home department, the first administrative act of my final department head, I couldn't not teach. So I was teaching poetry in prisons my last several years of active service at the university. And then I gave up the job I actually love, and that was stupid. But in the process, I came to meet some people who I'll call my teachers. And what they taught me was that I could no longer be a great teacher because I could no longer expect idealists in my classrooms. You can be a great teacher if you expect every student to be an idealist. If every time you think in your mind, you can't possibly do this, and then the student exceeds your expectations, after a while you stop saying you can't do this. And so you become as idealistic as your students are. And because I've had several experiences within the last few years indicating to me that a lot of people are just emotionally, psychologically, cognitively incapable of idealism, incapable of compassion, incapable of anything but being a taker. That's been a great and painful lesson for me. I could not go back into the classroom and over the course of an entire semester expect to see positive development in every single student like I used to be able to do. That rips my heart out. It's the facade that is torn away, the recognition of untruth. Yeah. Why did you get banned from your classroom? I was just a really bad boy. No. I was. Really. My last 10 years of active service at the university, I turned most of my efforts to 2 things. I continued to do field biology and support students who were doing field biology, undergraduate and graduate students, and generating money so that they could do that. But for myself, in addition to promoting that kind of work, I became a social critic more than anything else. So I began to view the lens of society. I began to view society through the lens of absurdism and social criticism. So I looked around at all the crazy things we were doing as a society, and I couldn't help but comment on them. So my last department head was hired specifically to make my life miserable enough that I would leave. Because once you're a tenured full professor, there's really nothing you can do to get yourself fired. So they can't fire you. I mean, I suppose had I been caught in the hallway raping a 11-year-old boy, maybe, if they had it on film, maybe they could have fired me. But that's basically what it would take. So a tenured full professor is almost impossible to get rid of based upon the work they do. So instead, what the administration did was create conditions that were inhospitable to my continued happiness. And so that's banning me from teaching, which I love to do. So now I'm paid $100,000 a year to not come to the campus. Most people would think that's a great deal. You get paid to not show up. It's hush money. I couldn't stop myself. So after a while, in addition, it became clear to me, and I explained this in my 2011 book, Walking Away from Empire, that Paul mentioned here at the beginning. It became clear to me that I could no longer speak out about the atrocities of imperialism while living at the apex of empire. Tucson, Arizona gets all its water pumped uphill across the desert several hundred miles. How do we do that? How do we get the fossil fuels to pump that water across the desert in open canals so that we get salty water? We get it the same way we always have. We go to other countries and kill people for it. You can't live at the apex of empire, point out that you're living at the apex of empire, continue to live at the apex of empire, and you look yourself in the mirror every day. You just can't. So at some point I couldn't anymore. So I left, and that was a mistake, and I'm tired of talking about that. Neener. Thanks for the question. Yes, Travis?
Why do you do this? You speak hundreds of times a year for way less money than you used to make. What kind of drives you to keep talking and traveling?
Right, you speak 100 times a year, you're not influencing anybody, you don't get paid anything. In fact, it cost me to go on these speaking tours. How could you be so stupid? I mean, I'm paraphrasing. He's my nephew, so he wouldn't actually call me stupid to my face. So why do you do this? He says, and I get this question a lot. Why do you go around reminding people that they're going to die? Isn't that a horrible thing to do? And you seem to get such glee from it. Well, there's a couple of things. One, I'm a teacher. It's not what I do. It's who I am. So I can't help myself. Two, nobody else is doing this. You think the corporate media and the corporate governments of the world don't know what I know? Of course they know. You think anybody's going to go on television and tell you this? No way. I was interviewed by Tom Hartman a couple of years ago on RT, and also by Abby Martin at RT, and I told them both about the evidence I've collected, and they won't speak to me anymore. I was on the program Conversations with Great Minds with Tom Hartman, and I think he's retitled it Conversations with Great Minds, with one exception. I interviewed Guy McPherson once, and that was a big fucking mistake. It's a long title. So I do this because I'm a teacher and I'm just presenting this evidence. Still, that seems like it's not enough, because it's a horrible thing to tell people that their lives are going to be shorter than they expected. And so when a medical doctor knows with 99.99% assurance that you're going to die within 6 weeks, and your medical doctor does not tell you that, we have a word for that. It's called malpractice. And as nearly as I can tell, the media and the governments and most climate scientists who are paid a salary are guilty of malpractice. Because they know. And they take the Michael Mann approach. I can't go there, Kevin. Why not? Why can't you go there? So I think you deserve to know. I think you're the patient who's in hospice and you don't even know you're in hospice. And by the way, even if I'm all wrong about everything, even if you last forever, which is a long time, especially toward the end, even if you live forever, I suspect you're going to derive joy from different things than this culture tells you you're going to derive joy from. You know, we talk about happiness. It's a constitutional right, the pursuit of happiness, which is ridiculous. Happiness is a shallow, superficial, nonsensical phenomenon. We should really be seeking joy instead, which goes a lot deeper. But we're all about happiness. That's like, you know, we buy a toy, so it makes us happy, and then 20 minutes later, we need another one. Where's the joy come from? It doesn't come from the toys. So there's a whole bunch of reasons. I'll tell you the truth later after everybody's gone. Yes, Barb.
So out of curiosity, the 18 months, the short end, what was that? Just temperature rise?
Yeah, it could be that within 18 months, we experience at least a 3.7 degree global average temperature rise as a result of, and those are all conservative figures. And so because of that temperature rise, we're going to lose habitat for our species. The interior of large continents are going to turn into dust bowls. And we're seeing these events already underway. You know, there's a great 4-minute clip from the HBO program, The Newsroom, from November of last year, written by Aaron Sorkin. And there's an EPA scientist, and he comes in and he's being interviewed. And he mentions 5 phenomena as what our future is likely to look like. Food and water shortages, well, they're already underway, right? Lake Mead is within inches of being below the lowest level that we'll be able to extract water out and take it to Las Vegas. Inches. If it drops a few more inches, Las Vegas doesn't have any water. California's snowpack, for the first time ever, is at 0% in the Sierra Nevada. 0%, that's not much, really. That was in May, a month before summer started. Food and water shortages are already underway. Already there are hundreds of people in Northern California who don't have water coming through the taps. Every day, every drop of water they use has to be carried in a bucket. Spread of deadly diseases. Perhaps you're familiar with Lyme disease, with malaria, with dengue fever. I was teaching the interaction between climate change and the spread of deadly disease in my classes 15, 20 years ago. And now they're well underway. The food and water shortages, spread of deadly disease, storms that have the power to level cities and create permanent darkness. Typhoon Haiyan, anybody? In the Philippines from November 2013? Hurricane Sandy? Katrina? I mean, there's all kinds of events. These things are already underway. Sometimes I feel like those great science fiction writers, Aldous Huxley and George Orwell and Ray Bradbury, and each one of them, when interviewed late in their lives and asked how could they see the future, said, I'm not seeing the future. I'm describing events that are underway right now. And so when the guy comes on the television program and describes all these things that are underway right now and says that's what the future looks like, well, that's true. And things are going to get a lot worse. So within 18 months, it could well be that we don't have habitat for humans because of the Great Dust Bowl and the drought that is now gripping this city. I've been hosted wonderfully and generously the last couple of days by Jean, who's sitting there in the back. And she's a lifelong gardener. And she's been following my work for a while. And she expressed surprise. She says, I know about abrupt climate change. I know about gardening. I've been doing this for a really long time. And this year, it caught me off guard. Abrupt climate change surprised me, of all people, and she laughs. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the 3 varieties of cherry trees, early, middle, and late, all being done, game over, now. By now. It's already underway. Events are already unfolding. 5 million people a year die early deaths because of climate change. 5 million people. People ask me all the time, when does it affect me? If you're one of the members of the family of the 5 million, you're there. And it won't be long for the rest of us. Yeah.
I know hypothetical is probably not fun to answer, but I was just wondering what you would think the point would be that we actually start implementing geoengineering, like spraying extra aerosols beyond what industrial civilization already does.
Right. So the question is, at what point do we start geoengineering by by implementing solar radiation management, or SRM as it's sometimes called, by putting additional reflective particles up into the atmosphere? And I don't think we're ever going to do that. Fortunately, the scientific literature is clear on that point already. There have been half a dozen journal articles, and then the National Academy of Sciences of the United States put together a panel of the 25 leading climate change scientists in the world. In February, they issued a report, I think it was February 25th, and they said it's not going to work, it's going to make matters worse. So I don't think we're going to purposely contribute more to solar radiation management than we're doing already. And Van Jones pointed out one of the reasons why. Van Jones, who went on to become Obama's green job czar in Obama's first administration, gave a speech, I think it was September 1st, 2007. And Van Jones, an activist working at the Ella Baker Center in Oakland, California, said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, he dropped a bunch of names. He says, I know the Clintons and I know Warren Buffett, and I've sat down and hung out with these people. I've been to Davos. I know what they're thinking. And among the things they're thinking is that conventional oil peaked in 2005, 2006. And he said, ever since then, you think you're terrified? You think you're informed and you're terrified that the system's coming down? They're even more scared than you are. He said, and here's the punchline, they're juggling chickens and chainsaws, trying to hold the system together for another day. They're in control. We think they're in control. We just assume somebody is the Wizard of Oz pulling the levers behind the screen. But they've been out of control for a while. They're throwing money at the situation in the form of the Federal Reserve Bank, printing money or creating digits out of thin air. But they admit that the whole situation with respect to industrial civilization is out of their hands. They're throwing everything they got at it. But at this point, it's just our faith in the system that allows the system to persist. So I don't think geoengineering will be implemented because they know that it's going to make things worse, not better. And they're amazed we made it this far. I kind of am myself. Yeah.
So as someone who's accepted the circumstances that are occurring, if I ever wanted children, I really don't anymore. And I'm wondering if personally you have any views on that biological imperative,
Yeah, the question is about the biological imperative that pushes us to have children, and do I have a perspective on that? Well, I don't have any, and that's a decision I made quite a long time ago. But fighting evolution is a battle we're never going to win. And a couple of examples come to mind. You know, I taught classes for more than 20 years on university campuses. Every single class, it didn't matter whether it was fire ecology or natural resource management or conservation biology, it didn't matter which class it was. Every single class, I would point out the horrors associated with human population overshoot, and that it gets worse every day. And every one of my students had children. So obviously I'm a shitty teacher. I gave this keynote address at some sort of, must have been an unimportant event if I was given the keynote address. And one of my students came up, and I pointed out in this keynote address that every child in the United States and Western Europe, as examples, in his or her lifetime consumes as many resources as 37 Kenyans, right? And so one of my students came up afterwards, Cheryl comes afterwards, and she says, "Hi, Guy, I'd like you to meet my 37 children, Sarah." So she got it, and then she had more. It's a biological imperative. You can't stop what evolution drives us towards. And evolution is about three things: flight or fight. If you live long enough, you procreate, because if you don't, your genes get lost. and then you acquire material possessions. Because at some point in the distant past, somebody walked out of the cave with a rock, and then they came across a saber-toothed cat, and they bonked the cat with a rock, and they said, geez, I got to get more rocks. This is awesome. And so we keep doing the same thing, right? I mean, there's all kinds of evolutionary advantages to having shiny things around us. And so that's what we do. So fighting that is tough. And, do I recommend people not have children in light of this knowledge? Well, no, but I recommended that for a long time. And it's one of those things that we don't tell people not to do, obviously, right? So I don't go up to people who have small children and say, oh my God, you're the world's worst person. You had a baby. There's more than one way to live. And that's really what I've been trying to point out for a long time. We assume in this culture that this is the way to live, the one way. And everybody just needs to get on board and follow our lead. But there are many ways to live. And I'm trying not to be judgmental about any of them. And I would encourage you to do the same. Rather, Kurt Vonnegut was asked the question, why are we here? Because when you get to be old enough and presumed to be wise enough, somebody's always asking, why are we here? And so Kurt Vonnegut would always defer to one of two people, as far as I know. He would defer to his son, Mark, who is now a Harvard-educated medical doctor. And before that, he was in an insane asylum. And between the two, when asked the question, why are we here, Mark Vonnegut said, we are here to help each other through this, whatever this is. Which I think is pretty awesome. And then occasionally, Kurt Vonnegut would quote one of his uncles, who, when asked that same question, why are we here, would say, we're here to fart around and don't let anybody tell you any different. So I think somewhere between those two, or maybe including those two, that's the answer we're looking for. We're here to help each other through this, whatever this is. And why don't we make it fun along the way? Why don't we act like our own individual lives are really not all that important, that we have to show up on the hamster wheel every day to keep the system cranking along? Why don't we act like, we're capable of spending time quietly with the people around us and experiencing that true joy that comes from human companionship? Wouldn't that be a lot? Wouldn't that be cool? I think so. Oh, and we can fart around with them, too. Yes?
When you talk about how large the odds are against being here, DNA and all that, would you ever so mind mentioning Seth Lloyd's quantum level computer being the driver behind evolution with at least a possible alternative explanation instead of this classic revolution applying transnational selection?
So you asked me to do you a favor and explain something that I can't explain because I've never heard of it before. So what are the key words there so that somebody can go to their digital device and track this path? Seth Lloyd, quantum level computers, and evolution. There you go. That's, you know more about this than I do, but the Google will tell you everything you want to know. Seth Lloyd, and I already forgot the other stuff. A driver behind evolution. Okay.
I think it makes perfect sense to me that evolution can't be the classic revolution. I was looking at the sort of explanation because the scientists actually
Okay, apparently this provides a third way beyond creationism and evolution by natural selection. Is that hand up? We have so much time. The trouble is, we have so damn much time.
Make a formal reference, but Star Trek, everyone's favorite episode, The Inner Lights, where Picard is introduced to the society that knows they're going to end, and they come up with some great way to sort of pass on their story. How do you think societies should go about moralizing our existence, other than
Right. So, referring to Star Trek, actually, the Next Generation, right? I love that example because everybody quotes the whole story, this whole storyline for one entire season incorrectly. Resistance is futile, right? Resistance is futile. The Borg is gonna incorporate you into the whole massive thing anyway. But Picard resisted, and he won. Resistance is fertile. It's not futile, but I digress. I forgot what you asked.
How should we memorialize that?
Oh, right.
Die, when we gonna put
How should we memorialize? What do we put on our collective gravestone as a species? How do we indicate we're here? And I love your excluding plastic from the equation because I'm going to talk about it anyway. So George Carlin, who was a great social critic in his day, pointed out that the reason the Earth created humans was to make plastic. And now that we've created a plastic planet, Earth is done with us and is going to shrug us off like a bad case of fleas, right? So if the Earth had intent, it clearly was plastic. I don't know how we memorialize ourselves. In fact, I think it demonstrates a certain amount of hubris to think that we're worth memorializing. Yeah, I think of the Fermi paradox, right? From 1950, Fermi wrote that any species that becomes sentient and intelligent enough to escape their own planet will almost certainly cause themselves to go extinct before they can spread their seeds to another planet. And it looks like we're a wonderful example of that. We tried to memorialize ourselves. We put spacecraft here and there, including in places that, like we haven't screwed up enough here. We have to go to other planets and plant our garbage. And so maybe at some point somebody will break out of Fermi's paradox and will show up on Mars or the Earth and say, what happened here? And we'll memorialize and we'll leave a message and we'll say, don't do what we did or something, but I don't know how we do that. It's a fine question to ponder, and I love pondering these hypothetical questions. But my favorite one is, what if there were no hypothetical questions? Oh, sorry, that's a hypothetical question. Yes.
Yeah, in my experience, the loss of hope was like attached to certain things. And as I went through a grief process, my hope attached to other things. Like what I'm hearing, like in you, is that hope attaches to spending some quality time with you. And what a beautiful thing that is. And as I listen to you talk about grief, this is relates to grief. There's different people who study the process of grief and what that pattern is that people go through. And I've heard you talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which I personally doesn't match for me. The person who has written about grief that really the pattern really matches for me is William Wharton. And the first step is acceptance. There's loss. The second one is that you work through the painful emotions of loss. The third one is making adjustments in your life in response to the loss. And the fourth one is reattaching your emotional energy to life. And so I'm wondering, are you familiar with that William Wharton? Should I send you something about it?
I'm not familiar with William Wharton. Of course, you can send me anything you like. And you're absolutely right. There's more than one way that people are going to experience life, including grief and grieving. The Grief Recovery Institute was pretty influential for me, even though they barely even acknowledge Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her groundbreaking work. There's a lot of different ways to view the world. One of the things I did as a graduate student is something almost no college teacher has ever done. I took a course called College Teaching. Most professors have no experience. in the classroom when they show up, right? So they get hired, and just because they know something about research, it's just assumed that they must know how to teach. So a couple of experiences there. I took a college teaching course, and in the process of doing that, I completed the Myers-Briggs type indicator and learned that I'm strange. I knew that before. And I went in to see the teacher. The best thing he did in the class was have us take that test, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and then spend a half hour or 45 minutes with each of us individually explaining exactly what that meant compared to other people. And I remember clearly the day I walked into his office and I told him who I am and that I had an appointment at 9:30 or whatever, and he sort of looks around for the paperwork, and he looks at my results, and he looks at me with wide eyes, and he looks back down, and he looks at me again, and he says, "Have you ever shed a tear of empathy?" And I'm like, haha, well, not very often. He says, "No, I mean ever." So apparently I was revealed as a sociopath when I was like 23 years old, and he could see right through it. It was weird. Then I went on to teach at the university, and I taught my dog to whistle. I taught my dog to whistle. I taught and I taught and I taught. I taught her for 3 years how to whistle, and she never did learn how to whistle, because there's a difference between teaching and learning. Anybody can teach. Not anybody can teach so that people learn. So no, I'm not familiar, and yes, I would like to know more, and there are many ways to learn. That was the point of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, was that people learn differently. People experience the world differently. And so if you're going to be effective, you might want to try a whole suite of techniques to get people to understand what you're trying to say. Which is why this presentation is so much different than it was when I was delivering the same information 2 months ago. 2 months ago when I was traveling in Europe, I had a personal assistant with me, and she went to each of my presentations. I gave at least one presentation every day, and I got immediate feedback. She would tell me, "You got to take out that slide. We aren't scientists. We don't know what the hell you're talking about. Put in a different slide that makes some sense. Oh, and here you put in a picture. There's too much text." And so that's wonderful to have that sort of instant feedback from somebody who, from the perspective of climate science, is a layperson. She's a teacher too. She has a PhD in another field, so she knows about teaching, and I was doing it wrong. I've been doing this for a long time. And so I appreciate that sort of feedback. Okay, let's take time for one more question, and then we need to plan our escape. Yeah. I don't understand the sociopath thing. What does that mean? Well, on the Myers-Briggs type indicator, there are 4 axes: introvert, extrovert, sensing, feeling, and I don't remember the others. But and they go from -10 to +10. And I was either a 10 or a -10 on 3 of the 4, and on the other one I was a 9. So apparently I exhibit fairly extreme behavior, lacking in the ability to empathize. Interestingly, it was about 5 years after that I stopped watching television because I cried at all the commercials. So I don't think I lack empathy completely. I mean, I felt really bad for that woman who didn't get the Xbox. So the score that I received on that exam indicated that I was a really horrible person. Yes, that really happened. I don't make up all the stuff I tell you up here. I just make up the science data. The personal stories, that's all true. Yes, that really happened. It's weird, I know. One more question.
This does not actually come from me. You do have fans, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah, mistakes have been made.
And before, some people know my peers, so this actually comes from someone else. So I disavow this question myself. Okay, how does anthropomorphic climate change theory account for intrinsic tectonic activity that equates to animals? How is energy release from these activities accounted for in climate models?
Okay, so the question is, how does anthropogenic climate change explain or is explained by? I didn't understand.
Apparently, he wants to know if it's responsible for earthquakes and volcanoes.
Oh, right. So does climate change explain tectonic activity? And is it accounted for in the models? Yes, to a certain extent it does. There's something called isotonic rebound. And as glaciers melt on land, they alleviate a lot of weight off the plate they're sitting on. And so the plate actually rises, and that appears to be at least partially responsible for increased tectonic activity, including volcanism. So there may be a positive feedback with methane release from volcanic activity. And then, of course, like almost everything that matters, it's not included in any models I'm familiar with. Certainly not for any of the assessments, like the International Energy Agency, the IPCC. They don't include any. Right. They only take into account carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They just ignore all these other self-reinforcing feedback loops, for example. And that's understandable when you look at how those major assessments are done. They're they rely upon a very conservative process. So the IPCC, by the time the report, the synthesis is released, the information in there is at least 5 years old, and most of it is 7 to 10 years old. They rely only upon the refereed journal literature as a starting point, and it takes years to work through the scientific process. They operate by consensus only. So if one person in a subgroup says, no, I don't think methane matters, then methane doesn't get included. And then after it's all done, it gets vetted through the political process before it's released to the public. So the politicians have to have their say before the information is released to the public. So it's an incredibly conservative approach that produces incredibly conservative results, relying upon very old information. I'll stay as long as we're able, which I think is another 30 minutes about, and if you want to talk to me individually. And Paul has a little bit to say. No more questions, please. You can ask me individually, but we're really out of time. Thank you.
We just got news that the books are on their way, that book. So if you want one, if you hang around a little bit, they should be coming in the door, and I'm sure Guy would be happy to sign them for you. Thank you.